So, when a company goes belly up, who gets paid? It's always a messy question. But what happens when the money isn't with just any creditor? What if it's with the IRS? Today, we're diving into a fascinating Supreme Court case that's like a real-life David versus Goliath. You've got a bankruptcy trustee on one side and the full power of the U.S. government on the other, all fighting over a pile of missing cash. Here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll get into the story of the company and how its money vanished. Then, we'll look at the specific legal tool the bankruptcy trustee tried to use to get it back. We'll see how the government put up a massive legal shield to block them, which led to a clash of legal codes that, well, only the Supreme Court could sort out. All right, let's get into it. Every big court case starts with a real story, and this one is no different. It all begins with a transportation company out in Utah called All Resort Group. Now, the timeline here is pretty straightforward and, unfortunately, not all that rare. Back in 2013, the company was already insolvent, basically broke. The very next year, a couple of its shareholders took company money, and I mean not their own money, but the company's, and used it to pay their own personal income taxes to the IRS. Fast forward 3 years, and the company officially files for bankruptcy, leaving all the people it actually owed money to with nothing. And we're not talking about pocket change here. The shareholders moved $145,000 of company funds right into the government's hands. That $145,000 is the money at the very center of this whole legal battle. So this brings us to the core puzzle. That money rightfully belongs to the bankrupt company, which means it should go to pay off its creditors. But it's just sitting there in the U.S. Treasury. How in the world can anyone get it back? Well, to answer that, you have to meet the hero of our story, the bankruptcy trustee. In every bankruptcy case, this person is given a very specific set of legal powers to basically hunt down and claw back money for the estate. The best way to think of a trustee is as an estate detective. Their entire job is to dig through the finances, follow the money trail, investigate any shady-looking deals, and do everything they can to recover funds for the people who got left high and dry. And the trustee's #1 tool for this job is something called avoidance powers. It's kind of like a legal superpower that lets them hit the undo button on certain payments the company made before it went bankrupt, pulling that money back into the pot for the creditors. Now, this specific weapon our trustee tried to use is from Section 544B of the Bankruptcy Code. And to use it, they have to check 3 boxes. First, you have to find a real creditor who was owed money at the time. Easy enough. Second, you have to point to another law outside of the bankruptcy world, in this case, a Utah law about fraudulent transfers. And third, you have to prove that under that Utah law, the creditor you found could have sued to get the money back themselves. Okay, seems straightforward, right? Well, here's the huge catch. The trustee isn't suing some other business. They're trying to sue the United States government. And the government has this incredibly powerful, ancient legal defense up its sleeve. It's called sovereign immunity. It's a rule that's been around forever, and it basically says you can't sue the government unless the government says it's okay for you to sue them. It's like a massive legal shield that just stops lawsuits in their tracks. Think of it as a giant do not disturb sign hanging on the government's front door. And this creates a perfect legal catch-22 for our trustee. Remember that third step? The trustee needs to find a creditor who could have sued to get the money back under Utah law. But because of sovereign immunity, no creditor could have ever sued the federal government in the first place. It looks like a total dead end. But there might just be a loophole. Buried deep inside the Bankruptcy Code itself is a little section, Section 106A, that seems to say the government gives up its sovereign immunity in these cases. The entire legal battle really just boils down to what this one section actually means. So this led to a huge disagreement, with 2 completely different interpretations. On one side, you have the trustee arguing that the waiver is broad. It cancels sovereign immunity for the entire process, including that nested Utah state law claim. But on the other side, the government argues, no, the waiver is narrow. All it does is open the courthouse door for the bankruptcy claim. It doesn't change the rules once you get inside. That shield of sovereign immunity is still up, and it still blocks the state law claim. This fight went all the way to the top. So how did the Supreme Court settle this legal showdown? David versus Goliath? Who won? In a nearly unanimous 8-1 decision, the court sided with the government. The trustee could not get the money back from the IRS. Goliath won. So you might be wondering why? What was the reasoning? Well, it came down to a few key points. First, they said the waiver was only jurisdictional. It just lets you in the courthouse door, but it doesn't create a new reason you can win once you're inside. They also lean on a classic rule. Anytime there's a law that seems to waive sovereign immunity, you have to read it narrowly in the government's favor. Basically, Congress wasn't clear enough to take the government's shield away in this very specific scenario. But like I said, it wasn't unanimous. Justice Gorsuch wrote a really sharp dissent. He basically said the majority was confusing two totally different things: having a legitimate claim versus having a defense against that claim. He argued that a valid claim under Utah law did exist. The trustee proved it. The only thing stopping it was the government's defense of sovereign immunity, a defense he believed Congress had already wiped away in the Bankruptcy Code. And that leaves us with a pretty big and honestly a kind of troubling question. By ruling this way, has the Supreme Court accidentally created a loophole? Does this decision mean the government now gets to keep money that in almost any other situation would have gone back to a bankrupt company to pay the creditors it wronged? It's a powerful reminder of how a few little words in a legal code can make all the difference in who gets paid and who gets left with absolutely nothing.